Now, we will look at some criticism and its response regarding the term and concept of engaged Buddhism. The first point is, was Buddhism always engaged? One criticism often leveled by the learned traditionalist Buddhist is that Buddhism was and is and shall always be engaged. So, the term engaged in engaged Buddhism is meaningless. A well known Theravada engaged Buddhist, Dr. A.T. Ariyaratne from Sri Lanka, responded to this criticism and said that bhikkhus were involved in imparting education and medical needs and serving as an advisor to the rulers and ordinary people in the pre-modern period. He vehemently states that the colonial occupation drove Buddhism away from the engagement. Thereby, the more secular roles of functions that were historically performed by the bhikkhus were steadily and intentionally eroded in importance by the British colonial power. This is how Buddhism became disengaged in Sri Lanka, and therefore, in the view of Dr. A.T. Ariyaratne, this engagement became even more necessary. It is a very complex assertion that Buddhism has always been engaged, never disengaged. This has been a debate among Buddhist historians which has continued for a long time. Many traditional and conservative Buddhists in Asia argue that Buddhism teaches monks to practice non-attachment from worldly materialistic things. If monks involve worldly things or problems, they cannot remain pure and get soiled because of their association with such things. In the same way, many lay people, especially in Southeast Asia, want their bhikkhus to stay in the viharas, that is monastery, where they will be pure and thus more befitting recipients of the dana, that is giving by the lay people. However, we can see in the Pali canon that the Buddha sent his enlightened ordained disciples to propagate and engage the Dhamma, that is the teachings of the Buddha, for the good and happiness of the masses out of compassion for others and the world. So, the next point is that is engaged Buddhism westernized Buddhism? Some Western Buddhist scholars argue that engagement with the world's problems is a Western habit. Hence, engaged Buddhism, which developed in the 20th century just when westernization was overwhelming Asia, is simply westernized Buddhism and hence a distorted form of Buddhism. Here it can be recognized that there has been a considerable Western influence on its leadership. However, two essential points must be understood with respect to Western influences on engaged Buddhism. The first is that the leaders of engaged Buddhism have not been merely passive recipients of Western ideas and practices. Although engaged Buddhists have embraced Western ideas that they have found useful, such as human rights, they have rejected Western ideas that they have not found compatible with their Buddhist worldview. I will explain the second part of this lecture, that is engaged Buddhism, what it is and it is not. So, the first important point is that engaged Buddhism is not a centralized movement. There is no fixed area of the movement of engaged Buddhism. It emerged in Buddhist Asia and is now spread to all corners of the world. It did not begin as a vision of any single leader. This movement has many leaders, hence it is not a centralized movement. The second point is Engaged Buddhism is not a new sect, nor does it belong to any established sect. All the Buddhist sects, including Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana, and even the non-sectarian Buddhists, may be involved in the practice of engaged Buddhism. However, not all Buddhists of any of these sects are engaged Buddhists. Now, the third point is engaged Buddhism is not a rigidly defined concept. Some individuals and groups involved in the social transformation can be easily recognized as an engaged Buddhist, such as His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, and Dr. A.T. Aryaratne's Sarvodaya Shramdan movement. In contrast, some borderline cases conscientiously put loving kindness at the heart of their practice, but have a little societal or institutional engagement. Now, the fourth point is Buddhist philosophy and ethics are the sources of unity among engaged Buddhists. The philosophical and ethical roots of engaged Buddhism can be found deeply entrenched within traditional Buddhist philosophy and values, which it ably applies to resolve contemporary problems. This is the source of unity among the engaged Buddhists despite their diverse and far-stretched origins throughout the various parts of Buddhist Asia. However, we can also safely say that engaged Buddhism is also a modern phenomenon that has been influenced by the modern social, economic, psychological and political forms of analysis of Western origin. So, now we will come to the fifth point, that is nationalistic Buddhism and chauvinistic Buddhism cannot be considered to be forms of engaged Buddhism. Engaged Buddhism is by its very definitions non-violent. It is an attempt to communicate the principles of Buddhism, including loving kindness, that is in Pali metta, and compassion, that is in Pali karuna, towards all in practical action. And on this count as well, nationalistic Buddhism and chauvinistic Buddhism cannot be considered to be the forms of engaged Buddhism. Now, we will look the sixth point, that is engaged Buddhist leaders and movements involved in various issues. Engaged Buddhists are involved in the issues of war, climate and ecological crisis, ethnic violence, caste system, racism, poverty, indigenous rights, capitalism and gender discrimination.